Hey everybody, this is John Fusco, and you're listening to the No Film School podcast. What would you do if you were tasked with building an entire universe on an infinitesimally small budget? Where would you even start? This is probably the biggest problem that any independent filmmaker with a science fiction project must solve. Co-directors Zeke Earl and Christopher Caldwell have found a solution. To put it plainly, you can't separate the money from the creativity. Some people may falsely interpret this sentiment as you have to make sacrifices to make a film within your means. What a filmmaker should really be thinking is, what are the creative decisions we can make that will make our film look expensive? For Earl, Caldwell, and producer Bryce Budke, this meant that every creative decision was tied with a producing decision. Perhaps the most important of these decisions was to rent a warehouse in Seattle, fill it up with 30 different artists, from bike makers to carpenters, and go through 7 months of pre-production, building the universe of their debut feature Prospect as practically and detailed as they could. Their efforts garnered them the Adam Yauch Hornblower Award after their premiere at South by Southwest. This singled out their film as the best in the Visions category. I sat down with Zeke, Christopher, and Bryce to discuss their old school, unorthodox methods and what it takes to build a utopia in pre-production. Hey everybody, this is John Fusco, and I am here with several members of the Prospect team. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves so that the audience can get familiar with your voices. Starting with you.
I'm Zeke Earl. I'm co-writer, co-director, and cinematographer.
Chris Caldwell, co-writer, co-director.
I'm Bryce Budke, the co-producer.
Awesome. So let's start by just giving us a little log line for what your project is.
Prospect is a sci-fi western about a father and daughter prospecting team who go to a remote alien forested moon to try to dig some valuable gemstones out of the ground. And yeah, it's things kind of go to shit from there.
Mm-hmm. Like any good movie. So then, you guys had this short at South. Was it at South by that it premiered? Yeah. How long ago was that?
2014.
2014? Okay. So how long has this whole journey been to make this feature?
Since then.
Since then?
Yeah, it's been kind of our sole focus since the short premiered.
Okay.
Admittedly, we were a little bit underprepared for the release of the short film. We didn't have a script in hand, but there was a lot of excitement immediately after releasing the short, and we scrambled to throw together a treatment. We flew down to LA and took a bunch of pitch meetings, some of which went disastrously. And from that point on, it was just a continuous back and forth of working on the script, flying to LA to pitch it. A lot of ups and downs, a lot of false starts, but we just kept working on it and developing. And it's kind of like, if we count the time that we were working on the short, which was legitimately still like part of the development of the feature,
right.
We've been developing this world for 6 years. So yeah.
So let's just start there. I mean, what kind of advice can you give to people who are coming off of success with a short and having these meetings and trying to pitch for a larger feature? What are some things that you learned there?
I don't know if we did it the right way. It took us, 4 years from that point on to get financed. I think it goes without saying, having a short film, absolutely huge. Proof of concept shows what you can do. And in a chunk, we also had a concept art book. We had a very production design heavy world, so we did a lot of renderings, and we printed it very impressively, really heavy. It was like an encyclopedia, so we could slam it down on tables.
Nice.
When we went to meetings.
I mean, we were fortunate enough to have a lot of very enthusiastic collaborators. Our production designer and a lot of the sets and props designers were working with us, for no pay. They had their day jobs, nights and weekends, and helping us do the designs, put together the pitch book, concept artists donating their time. But yeah, as far as just getting really explicit with the strategy, I think if we were to do, having a feature script in hand would definitely be good advice. It might have expedited things if we had done that. But I think one thing is we believe very much in getting short films online. After we premiered at South by Southwest, we just immediately put it online because you get that stamp of approval from the festival, which is great. But doing a festival run, a long festival run, that's just limiting the amount of eyes that can get on the project. And then, yeah, I think the pitch book was very much directly inspired by watching Jodorowsky's Dune and seeing how that thing went together. It's like, we want one.
Yeah. Let's talk about your production design because, making a low-budget science fiction movie is a pretty difficult thing to do. And I imagine that, you really have to think about where your money's going in terms of, like, building this world. So where did you guys, like, put that emphasis? What was like, your biggest focus in production design to build this world? Because it looks great. Like, it looks amazing for a low-budget science fiction. I'll say that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a million kind of little tricks worked in there. Like, they wear spacesuits like almost the entire movie, so you're not making like multiple costumes. You make one really, really good-looking costume. And our space travel in our universe is really claustrophobic, which means all the spaceships are small. Like, yeah, I mean, it was just very, I mean, I don't know, because I've not gone through a conventional process, but we opened a warehouse in Seattle where we hired like a ton of people directly. Like, I don't think barely anyone had ever worked on a movie before, but they all came together. So we were kind of in making this up as we went along. And probably the most fun, gratifying part of this process was like kind of like every day sitting next to our production designer, Matt Acosta, and like discussing this stuff. Like, we were so involved in production design. I think that's what it just really kind of comes down to, is we didn't just like pass this job off and, give notes every once in a while. Like, we were there every single day thinking about the movie, thinking about the shots, thinking about what was actually going to be on screen. So like, I was, able to influence like weird budget decisions on like what type of lights to buy for this thing. Even when I'm like, guys, we're not going to actually see that, and we'll save $200 if we do it this way. And like literally every creative decision, was tied with a producing decision. Like, you can't like separate the money from the creativity when you're working on this scale.
Totally.
Yeah. The only thing I just want to add to that is that as far as like where the money went, this kind of is like the wrong answer as far as strategically working with low budgets, but really it was about density. It was about detail, and it was about, when you're creating an entirely fictional universe, you shoot something in contemporary Earth, you kind of have all the accoutrement of the world at your service, and when we're trying to build everything from scratch, it's really just the pursuit of achieving that level of reality. And so there's a lot of effort put into graphic design. There's a big focus on like making sure there's branding on every little thing, because these are objects that were created by manufacturers that people purchased. So I mean, those kind of details were immensely important to us in just kind of the creative architecture of the world. We developed a children's TV show just so that we could put the cartoon character on our lead character's sweatshirt, that kind of thing.
So were those details that you all had in your mind before you went into production, like before you went into, I guess, pre-production? Of like building
a lot of
this
it
world?
A lot of it was, and a lot of it that there's cases where we knew we wanted to do some cool thing, and then a lot of stuff we discovered through the process, because like Zeke said, we opened up our own warehouse where we all were every day for pre-production. The production office was there, all of the craftsmen who were building all the props and sets were there, and it was just like a constant dialogue. And so yeah, I think a lot of across the board, the production design team, just it was their contributions were, their creative contributions were just constantly in the mix. It was less like,
and
you do this, you do this, you do this, and yeah.
I think what might be really surprising for a low budget film like this is we actually threw so much away, like good shit.
Wow, like what?
I mean, I'm just like, my first thing that pops in my mind is like we made like essentially a cigarette advertisement. It was like this beautiful thing done by an illustrator, and it was supposed to be on the T-shirt of a character that we cut. But we made the T-shirt, we made the costume. Or actually, we ended up cutting most of our biggest set.
Wow. So what was that set?
It was the interior of a freighter, of a cargo.
It's like the opening scene,
Right.
where we just see her listening to the headphones, but there was like kind of a scene that just didn't work out pacing wise. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much stuff that like people like because when you're there watching everyone put like someone worked on this for a week,
Yeah.
and then it just like isn't in the movie, or it's like there but the camera just never catches it. But I think on the other hand, it's like you have to air too much if you're gonna like, because the flip side of that is like something feeling empty.
You don't have it. So how? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I say, and the only counterpoint to this whole conversation is that the whole rainforest needs no set dressing.
Yeah. There you
Yeah,
go.
I mean that's a good point.
So how do you break that news to someone that their like work isn't going to be in the picture?
I
Delicately?
have written a lot of emails that were, like I like it's this film was made by a family. Like people were like, we have again like this warehouse. I've been kind of calling it a clubhouse. Like people were sleeping there. They were being paid for like 8-hour days, and they were spending like 14 hours, like all in. And it's like I got a call from like our head of transportation the other day. He like wanted to know how the premiere went. Like this is such a tight knit family around this film, and so yeah, like I'm just when I see a piece of production design that doesn't get in, it's like I feel like an obligation to like tell that person in person.
Yeah.
And everyone's great about it, and everyone's excited about it.
At the same time, it was such a team effort that like the team just put out all the stuff. Kind of together. It's like, I mean, individual ownership of like a particular prop. Like it happens with like hero stuff, but yeah, there's also just kind of a collective effort because we were just hurling pieces of plastic and tubing at the screen.
So how long were you in this warehouse? Is fascinating. To
Yeah,
me.
we had 7 months of pre-production, which for an indie film is huge,
Yeah.
and one of the biggest hurdles to getting financed, because we would walk into these rooms in LA and say, yeah, we need, we were asking for a year for a long time. And then we shortened that to 7 months, and people just looked at us like we were insane. But no, it's well, look at the numbers, it adds up. And it finally took our financier, who are like an incredible group of people, Bronze Studios in Canada, who like were like, all right, guys, yep, that does sound crazy, but like we'll take a gamble.
Awesome. How many people were in that warehouse? Like part of that team?
There were 15 people day to day, and then on certain phases we would phase up to maybe 30 or so, especially as we're getting more towards production. So it was a regular cast of people.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that we did have a number of satellite like vendors working on specialty things as well. It wasn't 100% there.
How specialized were these jobs? Like, what were some of these job titles in the warehouse? In terms of like,
I mean, it was
It's
it's-
probably the opposite of that, actually.
Really?
Where
Yeah.
people were like, we'd figure out what they were good at.
Yeah, because
And
we were
so-
pulling people. Seattle, particularly for production design, doesn't have like a huge presence, and so we were pulling people who like mechanics, cosplayers, industrial engineers. Because and people just working across all types of like non-film industry, and in a lot of ways, I think that helped inform kind of like the aesthetic of the film, because we were coming at it from a very utilitarian approach, like anything, like definitely style present, but like being conscious of like would. Even with architecture, the spaceships drawing a lot from like 60s space race era, like cosmonauts and NASA and like that kind of thing. And so I think the backgrounds not being from like people who are used to making props, particularly for sci-fi movies, you kind of get locked into a certain spectrum. And it was nice having people who just had they weren't bringing anything other than like actual industrial design to the table.
I think one of the things that might be unusual for even like a conventional set building is that we bought a CNC machine, like a 4x8 robotic CNC machine. So all the sets were designed like virtually, like digitally, and cut out of flat pieces of material and kind of assembled almost like a big Lego kit.
Yeah, that was crazy because like we'd have our set designers and they'd be sitting and working for weeks just on their computers, and then it would become time to like print the set, and so like in one day, all of a sudden there's like a massive structure.
wow.
Yeah.
So how long did that set take to would like a set take to build that way in terms of actually like physically producing it rather than on the computer? Because if you're spending weeks on the computer, is that much prep actually make it easier in a way?
I
Because then
think
you're just
so,
like-
because it was a very like one or like 2 or 3 people could put it together.
Yeah.
like you didn't need a whole lot of labor on the ground. But yeah, some of these sets would fly up in a few days after like being prepped so extensively.
and these are people.
And that's where design, it's like they were going through the design process, like in the 3D modeling and then designing, with an eye toward fabrication. And so by the time design was done, you had like basically schematics ready to print.
And who were these people that did that? Like they weren't actually
our set
designers.
our set leads were their names were Brandon Myers and Taylor Sizemore. And yeah, like Taylor Sizemore is a guy in Seattle. He kind of made a name for himself, like in this, like building custom bikes.
Okay.
And
Brandon
he
was
does
an amazing carpenter and like cabinet maker and like house guy, and and they were both just.
And he still does like
fuck
high-end
yeah, let's make
installations.
spaceships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, okay, so now we've talked a bit about pre-production. Like, let's talk about post-production and like what you used but like how you allocated that money towards VFX and you know, making the first, like the space, the outer space, and then sort of what you brought in post-production to make the moon actually look sort of ethereal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So CGI is something we're very, very critical of.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make something that felt very tactile, very tangible. So we put a lot of hard parameters around anything that's CGI. I think there's only one shot in the entire movie that's 100% CGI. But even if you're looking at a spaceship, it's usually through a practically shot window. We always wanted some degree of griminess of texture that's real, that's filtered through our fucked up lenses to kind of frame that digital element. And then we worked with an incredible artist who's a longtime Seattle friend, Ian Hubert, who has a knack for building spaceships, and he just kind of took this on as a passion project and put way more work into it than he was being,
Yeah, he's like an artist.
Yeah.
Like in every sense of the word, and he just got obsessed
Like
with texture, and his challenge for like this film was like texture that matched the production design.
And then so for the moon itself, the moon is covered in toxic dust, and it was really important that didn't feel like a shitty effect just over everything. So it was all practically shot. We actually tried doing it in sort of like a studio situation in the warehouse, but it wasn't working. So then we actually went into my basement, which is much more enclosed space, and that had the right dust airflow. That's like where the magic dust was. So we spent like an entire awful day shooting dust in my basement, and then it was very painstakingly layered on shot by shot.
It has to match the camera movement. If the camera's pushing
my
in, the
gosh.
dust has to like come past the camera, or like, you know, everything.
And then we, finished it in 4K, which we just didn't realize. Like, I don't even know how many VFX shots are in our film, because technically every dust shot is a VFX shot. And like, probably one of the biggest things, and this is like only a no film school answer, just to like heads up everybody, getting that 4K like VFX layers of entire scenes to the post house was like a nightmare.
I'm sure.
It's just like terabytes upon terabytes of data. Like, you couldn't upload it half the time. We were like driving hard drives to Canada, like a huge mess.
So when you were shooting those dust shots, did you also have to use, I mean, I'm assuming you also had to use the same camera. What kind of camera did you use for this?
Yeah, no, we shot the film on a red weapon and a red helium, mostly on the helium, so it was mostly shot in 8K. I think what is kind of particularly standout is that choice was made in tandem with choosing our lenses, which are made by a really funky British dude named Richard Gale, who rehouses old Soviet and German lenses with like some kind of modern elements and makes them kind of cinema ready, and he designed some custom lenses for Prospex. So we kind of wanted to take that 8K resolution coming out of the helium and just like fuck it up with glass as much as possible. And then we shot the short film anamorphically, but it was just so restrictive to our workflow in the feature, given kind of the anamorphics we were, really able to afford in a lot of ways. Like, it's a really budget conscious decision, where we wanted like just kind of a cheaper, lighter setup that we could duplicate and have more resources on the ground. But we chose to, in this crazy lens system developed by Richard, you can put these metal aperture discs. They're fixed aperture discs in the back of the lens. You like unscrew a thing, put in a metal disc that's a 3x oval that creates an anamorphic bokeh that's not even like possible with like real lenses.
Wow.
So it distorts and stretches the whole forest, which is really important, because it's like, we're very cognizant we're shooting an alien planet that is Earth, and we're not going to like trick anyone to thinking that we didn't shoot on Earth, but like it distorts that forest and makes it feel kind of eerie and otherworldly.
Very proud of our bokeh.
We love our bokeh.
It's amazing.
Stand by our bokeh.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So we got to wrap up here, but I guess I'll ask. I'll finish on this question that I ask a lot of my guests, which is, if you had one piece, pearl of wisdom, of advice to emerging filmmakers.
I mean, it's just got to be the one that everyone says, where
Sure.
it's just like, go make shit. I mean, there's just no excuse, and that's kind of like how we started, and it was just not. I feel like in a lot of ways we kind of jumped a lot of steps just because part of it I think was being in Seattle and being in kind of an isolated film industry where we were just kind of on our own and just like left to our own devices. And then as soon as you can, as soon as you can get eyes on stuff, just things pile up from there. But you got to make that first thing, and you got to keep throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, I mean it's a marathon. Like it's like you can't think of it like any other career. You can't think of it.
Well, I think Guillermo, like I was watching the THR roundtables for like the direct, and Guillermo del Toro said, like, identified that one of like the most important attributes for a director is stamina. And I would definitely, like, that felt like spot on as far as like, we're very early in our stages, but already it's just like, sitting with the same movie for 3 years, trying time and time again to try to get money. You gotta be prepared to grind.
What are some like tips for filmmakers to keep that stamina alive? What are some things that you guys did?
I mean, I'm like, this is where I'd like turn into an advocate of like a co-directing relationship. I can't imagine doing this process like alone. Like Chris and I like really actually like support each other because it's like an emotional roller coaster, and like to be by yourself, like I can't imagine it would be a lot
rough.
harder.
Yeah.
It's incredible that you were DP for this too, right?
And that's why,
Yeah.
that's how that works.
That only works if you are co-directing with somebody.
Absolutely. Well, damn, I wish we could have some more time to
And
get
that's
into
not true.
that, but
People have done it.
people
But I can't
it's like,
imagine.
don't
I can't
recommend
imagine.
it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like
maybe not on your first feature.
people have done a lot of things that have like gotten themselves killed. Like, gosh.
Great, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'd
Sounds
love
good,
to.
man.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Big fans.
Have a great South by.
You too.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, go ahead and subscribe to the No Film School podcast on whatever podcast platform you choose to use. Rate us, let us know what you think about the show, and make sure to catch both Ryan Koo's new podcast, The First Feature, in which he details all of the entire filmmaking process that went into making his first feature Amateur, and, of course, Indie Film Weekly every Thursday. I'm John Fusco. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim_John_Jim. You can follow No Film School at No Film School.